A pleasure to do. And please forgive me if I talk at some length. When I went to high school in East Flatbush, there were about 6,000 students. 95 of us came from Jewish homes. And the symphonic band and the orchestra numbered, I would say, the band numbered 110 and the orchestra about 100. Every single day, I would have lunch with a group of the musicians, and we would always talk about music and what we heard on WQXR the night before. These were the days when the New York Times every single day had or I guess all of the radio stations listed what they were going to be doing. So first thing we did was wake up in the morning, have breakfast, rush to school, and make sure that we heard who and what was going to be played. So those were always great times. This was probably how I first heard of Rosalyn Tureck. I would imagine it must have been in the late 50s and in the early 60s. And we always, of course, listened to her recordings. My father always was bringing home records, and we were always listening on the radio. Then, one day in a session of the orchestra, it was my junior year then, not my senior year, because my wife and I were already dating, so we were 16, 17 years old. A fellow by the name of Alfred R. Weil, who happened to have been the associate editor of Piano Quarterly, it turned out to be many, many years later. He took out 2 tickets from his vest and he said, "Has anybody here ever heard of a woman who was known as the High Priestess of Bach?" And I said, "Absolutely, of course, sure, her name is Rosalyn Tureck." He said, "Would you like 2 tickets?" And Sylvia and I went to one of our first piano recitals together, which of course has been a relationship. We've been married for 43 years. So that was the first time that I actually saw her in public. How did I get to know her? The very first time I encountered her, she was walking with a friend of hers whose name was Marshall Chrysler. He was a member of the temple and a piano teacher here in the community. And they were walking together, so I said hello to him, and of course I couldn't resist saying hello to her. So this must have been in the early 1980s. And then when she joined Temple Emmanuel, our relationship grew and grew until I really became what I used to like to call, I was her shamus, I was her sexton. I only lived 3 blocks away from her, and my wife and I did anything that she asked us to do and to try to make her life easier as she was doing all of her ventures. You know, it's a kind of miraculous thing. When she graduated from high school in Chicago, I think, right? Chicago. A member of her class was Saul Bellow. Now, to have a genius like Saul Bellow and a genius like Rosalyn Tureck both at the same time in your class is really quite a remarkable feat for an academic institution. My immediate impression of her was, aside from her music, was that she was a genius who was also a musician and a great pianist. But I thought she was a genius on every single level. I have to confess that the first time that she was in my apartment and she sat down and she started to play actually the Brahms Handel variations, the very last one with the fugue. This was an old style ode that I had that she hit it so hard, and I never told her this, but the sounding board had to be replaced. So that's shows you the power of a great pianist, the physical power. There was one night also that she came over for Shabbos dinner, and she said, "Let's play some four-handed music." We had guests there at the time. She said, "Do you want to do the Schubert F minor fantasy?" I said, "Yes, let's do the F minor fantasy." And we did, especially at a slow tempo at the end. But I will always remember the fact that I did have a chance to play four-handed music, Schubert with Rosalyn. Look, she was a great artist, and she had an artist's temperament, but I think her greatest strength was her general brilliance. She was brilliant on every level. She was a musician who was also interested in so many other things. She read voraciously, and she wrote. I think she was a super genius. I would put her in that level, and a super genius who was a phenomenal pianist. Certainly one of the three greatest female pianists of the 20th century. Genius. Well, she certainly taught me that Johann Sebastian Bach was a super genius, of course, himself, and that his music needn't be, that his music was applicable to any medium, actually. It didn't necessarily have to be a clavier. It could be anything. And of course, she taught me how some of the violin concerti were also transposed or transfixed into other media. She taught me about, I think, in that way, musical flexibility. And she did teach me of something I could have never reached, and that would be her high standards. If I ever had any ideas of ever becoming a concert pianist, which I never really did, I just did it because I loved it, her mastery and her greatness really guaranteed me and assured me that I knew what I was doing when I became a rabbi instead of a concert pianist. You know, it would have to be a very rarefied place because she was one individual and she was very much her own person. She wasn't, I don't think that she was the sharing kind with large groups. She knew who she was, she knew what she wanted to convey, and she knew how to convey it. I tell her I miss her. And I do.